and welcome back to my channel. Apologies, it's been a bit of a time since I did my last video. I just haven't had time to fit it in. In today's video, I wanted to go through your comments on the videos on ADHD as an evolutionary advantage. If you recall, I did some videos asking, is ADHD an evolutionary advantage, and I showed the evidence for why it is not, I'd now like to go through your comments on those videos. So one of you says, articles like this, the article being is ADHD an evolutionary advantage, which was found in The Guardian some time back. Articles like this contribute to the trivialisation of ADHD, which in the current political climate is very dangerous. This is social model ideology distorting what should be reliable scientific research. How anyone thought an online foraging game in any way recreates the environment that early human foragers had to navigate, with all the dangers that they had to contend with, and surely impulsively picking a deadly berry is more or less likely, if one is easily distracted, is beyond me. Yes, I completely share your sentiments there, 100%. As I say, I do feel this is pseudoscience. You know, it's not real world. If they really wanted to test it, they'd have to put people with ADHD, not for traits, not high levels of traits, but actual diagnosed, clinically impaired people who meet the criteria. They'd have to place those people in a hunter-gatherer environment, and there are still in the world certain tribes. My knowledge on this is very patchy. Some of you might know more than this, but I do know there are still certain tribes in the world that do follow a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. So maybe they could, although I don't know if how this would work, but the only way they could really test it is to put people with clinical ADHD who meet the full criteria, including clinically significant impairment, particularly those whose impairment is more severe, because it's always rather unrepresentative when they pick the mildest of the mild, and actually put those people in that hunter-gatherer lifestyle and see how they fare. That would be interesting, and that would be a lot more valid, I suppose, than assessing in a very artificial laboratory type setting. But to my knowledge, I don't think I've ever done that. So another one of you says, this sounds highly dubious. Among other things, I'm very sceptical of the value of any kind of experiments outside of the natural sciences. Experiments in areas such as psychology are highly artificial and lacking in validity. We also, of course, know nothing about the psychology of these early humans, so such ideas are speculative. Yep, thank you. So the next comment, I agree with you, by the way. Next comment, I loved the point about the assumption that someone with ADHD would hyperfocus on something beneficial. That made me laugh, because I know how often I hyperfocus on completely unhelpful things while neglecting important things that need doing. A few weeks ago, a huge part of the day, with all its important tasks such as cooking, were totally disrupted because I was hyper-focusing on the differences between two virtually identical styles of a Japanese martial art, which I am never going to participate in anyway. I was totally absorbed in this trivial and pointless subject, as if my life depended on it. So yes, that's a good point. Like, hyper-focus is not always on things that actually are essential to furthering one's life goals. It can sometimes be, but more often than not, it's on things that might be deeply engrossing and absorbing, but are highly idiosyncratic to the person, and can be at the expense of other important tasks. Like, you don't get to choose what you hyperfocus on. If it so happens that what you're hyperfocusing on is helping you in your life tasks, so say, I don't know, say for the sake of argument, you're studying and you happen to be really, really interested in what you're studying, and then you hyperfocus and you get really good grades, that's great. But it doesn't always work like that, and more often than not, the subject of hyperfocus is something that isn't helping you to further your life goals. I mean, it might be highly enjoyable, but the problem is that you get so sucked into it that other things get neglected. So that's a good point. Okay, the next one of you now. Sorry, but I know that had I been around in the hunter-gatherer days, I'd have likely been forgotten out on a hunting trip due to the fact that I can't easily bond with others. Add to that autism, meaning that I need a lot of time to myself, and you have a recipe for disaster in a community where you would need to stay together to survive. My ADHD would not be an advantage, as being distracted means that I miss a lot of things due to not being able to focus. Oh look, I found a berry. Oh shit, there's a saber-toothed tiger there. And I'm going to die because I hyper-focused on the berry. It makes me distracted without my medication, and cave people do not have Concerta to hand. Anyone for whom the traits developed into a full-blown disorder would have likely not survived. Let's not forget that time in history where autistic children were abused because they were seen as changelings. So yeah, it's a good point. Yes, they didn't have medication in those days, so it would be even worse, particularly for those with very severe ADHD who need to take their medication. It's a good point. Next one. I think that there are many autistic humans which only survive these days because we don't have to live in tribes, unlike in ancient times. Yeah, it's a very good point. Now we have a welfare state in most developed modern world. USA is profoundly lacking in that, but in most of the developed modern world, most countries do have, I mean, even USA has a rudimentary welfare system, it's just not very well developed, but in most developed countries there is a welfare state of sorts, where people can get assistance if they're disabled, you know, like benefits or social security, as I prefer to call it. Whereas back in those days, there's nothing like that at all, and it was very tribal. It's all tribes, and yeah, people could be ostracised if they didn't keep up with the tribe. It was all about survival. It was very much hand to mouth. If you couldn't keep up, if you couldn't help the tribe, if you were seen as a liability, you would be cast out. You know, there was no room for feelings or sympathy or in those days, because it very much was about survival. And when things are about brute survival, that comes first, doesn't it? So we're very lucky these days. I mean, you know, we moan about it for the fact that it's still not as developed as it could be, and of course there's a lot that should be done, and it's still, disabled people are being highly discriminated against and all the rest, but compared to back then, no comparison. Okay, so I'm going to move over to the next video now to carry on going over your comments.